Happy Thursday. Happy Friday Eve. Yeah, that was some kind of cool, like, not exactly, well, I don't know. Those could have been 240 BPM. I don't know. That was the kind of stuff I listened to in college. And you're going to the rave with your light sticks and you're, oh, the good old days. So yeah, tomorrow's July the 4th here in the States. Oh my gosh. I know we say this all the time, complaining about the heat and how fast, thank you, Druid, how fast the week goes by. But man, every week it surprises me, right? So, yeah, I hope you guys have had a great week. And I've been busy, just with like a random smattering of things. So some weeks that's how it goes, don't get any like major projects finished. I sort of start 80 new ones. Do you guys have that where yeah, I'm sure you do. I don't think I'm alone in that. So I have a couple of little update and a couple little things to show you, and then I'm on this magazine kick, you guys. I have a couple of issues of Women's Day, and back in the day, Women's Day was a source of patterns and things. The 3 issues I have, 2 of them are regular issues and one's just like a special publication. So I thought this would be fun to look at. They have a lot of stories in them. And I'm wondering if maybe we should read some of these and see what they're all about. Kind of give you like I guess they're kind of romance stories. What were people interested in back then? We've read some of the stuff from the mid 1800s. Those like sappy stories that were in Godey's Ladies Magazine. So, what does this look like in Women's Day in 1932? So anyway, I thought we would breeze through those and then maybe see about reading some of the stories at a later date. Let's see what else. I think that's kind of the big stuff. Let's get into it. So I'm a bad cake. I really did nothing for Pride Month. And, I think I stay apolitical here. I don't think that LGBTQIA rights are a political thing. I think they're a cultural thing. And I think that, some of the things going on here in the U.S., I don't like. I'm an ally. My son is queer, part of the queer community. And I really didn't say much over Pride, and I wish I had. I really intended to. It's a community I care about. So anyway, I thought, I came across this thing the other day and I thought it was kind of interesting. And I thought I would share it just, from a design perspective, what's the deal with the Pride flag? And, the Pride flag gets a lot of condemnation in certain communities. In other communities, it is a source of pride. But what's the history of it? So I thought we would just run through that really quickly. This is from Pantone, of all places. And let me drop this in case you want to read the article in more detail. I'm only going to go through a little bit of it. But if you want to read the article in more detail, here's the link. Oh, darn it. Hold on a minute, you guys. I have to put it in here. Sorry if you're... Oh, I was looking at Miniverse at Target. Okay, so there's the link for you. And yeah, I came across this the other day. I think it might have been in my feed, so I don't know. But they assign, so I'll just read to you what they say here, just a little bit. So color is a universal language. It's also one of the most powerful tools we have to instantly convey a message and rally around a cultural identity or shared cause. Color captures the spirit of a community or movement at a moment in time and unites them without having to say a word. And, think about some of the other things that we see culturally, besides a pride flag. We've got breast cancer awareness. If you see a pink ribbon, you know exactly what that is. There are many other diseases, conditions, and just communities that have adopted different, colored ribbons or, a colored armband kind of thing. I know autism, that they're using like puzzle pieces that have multiple colors. I thought that one's interesting. Ovarian cancer and cervical cancer. Now I'm trying to think which is it. Is teal. And I did a mini swap one time with, to promote, cancer awareness. And I swapped with a woman who had battled ovarian cancer. And, at the time, I mean, this is maybe 10 years ago. At the time, it has a pretty high, mortality rate. So, not getting all the way down into that topic, but again, it's, these colored symbolism is out there as a shorthand. And so that's what they're getting at here. So here is your traditional pride flag. And I got to tell you, Pantone 812C, which is the pink one, mwah, chef's kiss. It's like my favorite color. So the history of this flag is 1978. This is the one that's been around the longest. Oh! What happened? Uh-oh. Do I not have... Oh. I'm afraid I do not have the fun stuff here on my desktop, so now I'm not seeing what happened. Hey, Jill! Ah! Jill's resubscribing. Our tumble turd. Glad you're here, Jill. Keep us on in the background. Give us some statistics, some metrics. So anyway, this is the flag that's been around for a long time. And what it says, artist and activist Gilbert Baker created the first widely recognized pride flag in 1978. San Francisco Board of Supervisors member Harvey Milk, who is a name that you hopefully are familiar with, he was the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California. He tasked Baker with designing a symbol that would inspire and affirm the LGBTQIA+ community. Until that point, the pink triangle was used as a reclaimed symbol of gay pride and liberation. When he approached Baker, Milk sought a new kind of gay visual identity, one born of pure joy and positivity. Baker chose the colors of the rainbow because rainbows have served as a symbol of hope since the earliest recorded history. Baker also assigned meaning to each color, and we'll look at that. What I can say, though, that pink triangle, I grew up in, a small town in sort of central Northern Virginia, and then I went to school in Richmond, and I was in Richmond I was there some in 89, 90 before I graduated from high school. I lived there for a little bit for a young artists thing. And then I went back to school there for college. And so I was there for like 5 years, give or take. There were several establishments. Some were kind of openly like, this is a gay bar, and others were kind of, secretive about what they really were. But that pink triangle was used. And I didn't know what it was at first. And then when I discovered what it was, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of a secret language. So, even 1978 with the pride flag, you still have that pink triangle being used at least into the 90s. So what he chose, Gilbert Baker chose, so hot pink represents sexuality, red represents life, orange, healing, yellow, sunlight, green, nature, turquoise, art and magic, blue, harmony and peace, and purple represents the spirit of the community. So, and then, let's see, the first versions of the flag were hand sewn. So we got our sewing in there. So hand sewn by Baker and a team of volunteers to be flown during the 1978 San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade. Hot pink and turquoise were later removed from the flag so it could be mass produced. And the 6-band flag, often simply called the rainbow flag, became one of the most recognizable symbols of the modern LGBTQIA+ movement. The flag was iterated on in designing the Philadelphia Pride flag and the Progress Pride flag. So they are ones you might be a little bit more familiar with now. And maybe this one not even as much. This one was 2017. So this is much more recent. And this is adding in black and brown for queer people of color. And then the Progress Pride flag is the one that I think we'll probably see a lot of today, because it moves the BIPOC colors over here into this triangular shape, and then it adds in transgender colors. And that one was created in 2018. And then we've got some others, and I won't go through all of these, but bisexual pride flag, and there's symbolism to all of the colors. Lesbian pride flag, transgender, which this one's interesting. This one was first created in 1999. I feel like this is so current, and new, but it's not. It's been around for a while. And I want to say there's another one that is from a while back too. So this is the non-binary. This one was from 2014. So non-gendered colors. So I thought those were interesting, whatever your feelings about this are, I guess I would say keep it to yourself. Because this is some stuff that I feel strongly about. But I thought it was an interesting kind of educational thing. The more you know, the better. So belated pride, honoring pride. Next thing, and I feel bad going from something that's kind of culturally significant to something entirely frivolous, but you guys, when we looked at miniatures recently, and I want to say Robin had looked to see, I didn't realize that there were actually so many miniatures patterns made by the big four pattern makers. And Robin said, oh, there's tons of them out there on Etsy. So after the stream that day, and I can't remember, I don't think it was this week, it was last week, I got on Etsy and looked, and I was like, oh my gosh, there really are. So I picked up 2 patterns that were pretty affordable. This one is probably from the 80s or 90s. I don't know if I saw a date on it. Usually there is a date. Oh, this one says copyright 1979. My guess is this was available throughout the 80s. It's got, some rather 80s looking furniture and whatnot, kind of overstuffed chairs and things, but really cute. I mean, look at this little dining room with these, the fancy chairs. I don't know how well you can see that, but the fancy chairs covered with the little skirts on them and stuff. I thought that was really neat. And then what I feel like this originally started as is this pattern, which is I saw a date on here, I thought. No, I'm not seeing it. I think it's from the 50s. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's from the 50s, and I don't want to take it out of the envelope because it's not in great shape, but it's got the seller sticker on the plastic. But see, some of this stuff, the couch, the couch is a little bit different, but you have beds, you have this chair and ottoman here, and then you have the baby bassinet, and then behind this sticker is like a little vanity thing. So, I mean, you can see some of this stuff reoccurs in this pattern. So I feel like McCall's had some basic patterns for this kind of stuff. These miniature dollhouse things, and they kind of recycled it over the years. This one from the 79, though, has the instructions for building this whole house here, which I thought was really interesting. That's part of why I bought this particular one, because it's got the measurements and everything. And it recommends you build it out of either foam core or just cardboard, I think. So anyway, I thought they were fun. I'll have to trace them and make a little something some little furniture. I thought those were fun. Okay, so let's get to looking at some stuffs. Um, like I said, Women's Day is an interesting magazine. I'm sorry, not Women's Day, Women's World. Women's World. Can I ever get the name of anything right? You guys must think I'm a lunatic sometimes. Let's see. So this one is Women's World. So this first one that we'll look at, oh, would help if I actually showed the screen, wouldn't it? Okay. So this first one is actually a specialty publication, and it's specific to dress and home craft. Most of this is about dress. But there are a few little fancy needlework things, and there's a couple things in here that I kind of want to point out because it sort of helps to know these things in order to date stuff. And I know a couple of these things are going to be like really obvious to you guys. But anyway, I thought this was really cute. You see, just a charming little illustration of, fitting this child. It's adorable. And Woman's World was published out of Chicago. So there was a lot of publication and stuff happening in Chicago in the early 20th century. I guess it's kind of a central place between the East and West Coast, of course. But like Sears is out of Chicago, etc. So there's lots of stuff there. So the clothes here, I love. So first of all, these lounging pajamas, be still my heart. Aren't these fabulous? You got them for little kids, little girl. And they're just like, I love a lounging pajama. These have little gathered ankle cuffs, and that looks like more like sort of a bloomer. This one has got a really interesting cut. Of course, there's an emblem on here that I think is a little, culturally insensitive through our eyes today. Back then it wouldn't have been a big deal, but I always point these things out just to ensure that, certainly we are offended or icked out by looking at, some of these things today through today's lenses, but we have to recognize of the time, and I won't read this, but you can see here what it's talking about. Anyway, this one is cute though. This one's like a clown, I think. So, black cat pajamas. Oh, I missed this. Is this the little girl? Is hers a cat? Yes, look, it's a little cat. Oh, how cute. Okay. So we have our table of contents and lots of text in here describing things. And you can see like all the stuff here that's available in this magazine. This section's interesting because this is, this is the kind of stuff you see in fashion magazines all the time, even today, I guess, although I haven't read a fashion magazine in ages. But, what to do if you are very tall and you want to minimize your height. So these are the correct and incorrect lines. And it says correct and incorrect lines showed by comparison. Are they saying what's bad? The tall, drooping figure, the camouflage of trimming, breaking the long lines. Honestly, I look at this, and I see it's probably a matter of, well, as a taller person, I wouldn't say I'm like super tall, but when I was a kid, I was much taller than many of my peers. I kind of evened out in college and people caught up to me and I'm not so tall anymore. But having been quite tall, and I drooped a lot, right? I kind of did the shoulder slump. It sometimes is embarrassing to be tall, especially if you're in high school and the boy you're dating like comes up to your chin. Ask me how I know. So I understand this, wanting to kind of minimize how tall you look. But the thing is, if you're tall, you're tall. You can't make yourself shorter. You just can't. And I don't know. At this point in my life, I think like, be proud of your tallness. I would say that to any girl. Be proud that you're tall. You can reach things. You can see things that short people can't. um, but anyway, this was kind of interesting. The importance of the hat. A tall woman is also apt to go to an extreme in choosing hats that she thinks will make her look shorter. It is a fact that trimmings placed on top of the hat and high bows or feather trimmings will make one look taller. Well, no shit. Okay. If you are not naturally willowy, okay, so this is, okay, you're tall, but what if you're fat? What if you're tall and fat? Oh my gosh. So this is the larger woman. So you think for a minute, like, you know, let me read this because I'm sure it's quite offensive. A careful presentation backed by a fund of personal experience is given to the stout figure on this page so that one may get the best effects from her clothes and appear to the best advantage on all occasions. You're starting to see a little bit of Carrie Hall in here, aren't you? You kind of can see, like, this is just a couple years before Carrie Hall wrote her book. Kind of see that mentality, right? Maybe you are so stout that you feel and look conspicuous, or possibly you are just a little too plump, in that condition when the size you had grown accustomed to wearing is just a little too small. In both cases, much can be done through the lines of the costume to look as you would like to appear. And of course, one's looks have much to do with one's feelings. Okay, that's not bad advice. This does not mean that dieting and exercising in a conservative degree should be abandoned. So feel good about yourself, but don't give up diet and exercise, hon. But by adding intelligently selected clothes to the right diet, plenty of water between meals, and exercise, no one need ever feel that she cannot follow the fashions for long, slender lines. Okay. Hats and shoes for the larger woman. The full-hipped figure. Long lines must be unbroken by accessories. I do know that. When you have anything that's kind of going like horizontally, it cuts you up, and especially if you're short-waisted, it kind of messes with the lines, and it kind of makes you look chunkier. The full-busted figure. The fat little girl. Oh, that made me mad. Like, oh my goodness. This is where the fat shaming starts, is telling a child that they're fat. They make you look short and dumpy. I mean, come on. We could have nicer language than that today, hopefully. So anyway, these little girls do not look fat and dumpy to me, but today's lens, right? All right. Clothes etiquette is a fascinating game. I thought this would be interesting to read in detail at some other time, but you know, this is the kind of stuff, I mean, you still see this, like Vogue and Cosmo and all this stuff. They still, like, you know, look at things in these categories. Nothing has really changed. You know, you have business wear, you have sports clothes, you have streetwear. They are all still categories. Homeware, you know, even though what we wear in those categories has changed a lot. Church wear, afternoon functions. What the silhouette reveals. So, yeah, this is interesting. Many people are now making silhouette pictures with a camera. Again, 1928. Oh, well, somehow I got this upside down. This is interesting. Remember, I think we mentioned this, Color Me Beautiful, the thing from the 80s, right? So this is getting into harmonious color combinations. And, you know, I guess it's not really talking about, you know, your own, like, complexion, but, like, how colors harmonize together. But it is talking about hair color. So this is interesting. So auburn-haired people should avoid pure red and shades, pure red hues and shades, and pale blues. Gray-haired people. If you've got a sallow complexion, if the complexion is florid. I mean, so I guess it does kind of get into this, but, you know, to, like, when I think about Color Me Beautiful, I don't think it, like, florid and sallow were not words that were used necessarily. It was like, do you have yellow undertones to your skin? Do you have, red or pink undertones to your skin? That's I think the nicer way. Sallow and florid kind of are bad. I think they sound negative. How did I get all these upside down? This is useful and interesting. So this is how to take measurements. So this is all the places that you can measure on, on your body for garment making. And if you've ever made garments, this is the proper way to do this. To take all of your measurements. There are, let's see, the bust measurements a lot of times, and the hip measurements are the things I think that are difficult for people, because you have to get your like tape measure straight. If it's, if you let it droop in the back, or, you don't get it in the right place on your full hips and stuff, you can kind of mess up your measurements. Always best to do it with another person, but, this is information that has not changed. How to alter a paper pattern satisfactorily. This is probably pretty good advice. They're showing folding the pattern up. They're showing cutting pieces, and I'm assuming, let's see, talk about sleeve length. Okay, yeah, here is the they're saying for a large figure, but this is the large bust. So you're spreading the fabric apart with possibly a dart, or just giving it more space. And without reading this in detail, you'd have to alter your sleeve area, your shoulder area when you do this. So, but good advice, it appears, perhaps. It's been a really long time since maybe about a year since I've made a garment. You may now cut with confidence. So I guess this is, once you understand altering your pattern, now you can cut it out. It's really funny. I saw, and I responded to it. Now I'm trying to remember if it was on Facebook or Instagram, but it was somebody had, it's somebody, and I think she's in another country, and I can't remember if she's Canadian or she's somewhere in Europe, but she had mentioned, like this, the how people, like the internet thinks that, like TikTok thinks this is how you lay out patterns. And it was this little video of this woman. She looked pretty young, and she had this beautiful tie-dyed fabric, and it was a lot of it. She'd spread it out, and she had all these pattern pieces that looked like probably a dress. Might have been like kind of a complex dress. And she's just laying out all the pattern pieces, like just jigsawing them in there. And so you've got like a dress or a skirt that's like the wrong way. Like it's across the weft instead of with the warp. And we all know, if you sew something with the bias going in the wrong direction, I mean, even if you've never made a garment, you do know this from quilting. When your bias is going the wrong way, you're going to have things pull out of shape. And as you can imagine, when you get a bigger piece of fabric with the bias funky and you're putting it on your body, it's not going to hang right, and it's just going to look weird. It's not going to fit, and you're going to get frustrated. And there was a million comments of like, what is wrong with this girl? and I was like, well, we learn from our mistakes, right? Right? Unfortunately, I think people don't learn the proper way. I mean, that's something when my mom taught me how to sew, and I was making like my first garment. She showed me, like, she's like, no, we're going to learn how to do this correctly. Lay your fabric out on the living room floor, and here's how you pin your pattern down. Here's how to use a tape measure or a yardstick to make sure that those grain lines on the pattern line up with the grain of the fabric. Here's how to look at your fabric and make sure it has a straight grain. Often fabric doesn't, especially today. I mean, even the stuff that's printed, I think about some of the quilting fabrics that are printed like in Japan and Korea, that they're high quality, or should be high quality fabrics, especially for as much as you pay for them here in the States. But even these really high quality fabrics, sometimes the straight of grain is not right. And so it becomes very difficult to make, garments out of that stuff. It's probably not as big of a deal when you're using it for small things like quilting or making bags and things, because you can kind of, fudge it. But anyway, that's a skill that I think is, unless you take like a sewing class, they don't teach home ec so much anymore. I don't do any schools have home ec. I don't even know. And just people are not learning this stuff like they should. And so a lot of it kind of it breaks my heart a little bit that people who want to get into these sort of things, creating garments and just sewing for the pure joy of it, might be getting frustrated because they see stuff like that on TikTok and they don't see what happens after that girl cut that big mess out. So anyway, I think that this is, for lack of anything better, I think this is all pretty good advice. Shrink wash, right? Pre-shrink your stuff. The proper way to make notches, seam allowances, all this kind of stuff. And I think I've probably fitting. This is another good topic. And on the topic of fitting, I think I've probably told you guys the story before about my grandmother when she was 17. She was right out of high school. This is interesting. Her high school only went up to the 11th grade. They graduated at the 11th grade. They did not have a 12th grade. I thought that was so strange. So although my grandmother had a high school education, she only had up to the 11th grade. And as a high school graduate myself, 12th grade was probably a useless year. I had literally a study hall, 2 open period art classes where I basically just ran errands for the art teachers and stuff. And so I think I only had like 2 academic classes and the rest was art. So probably not a big deal to graduate in the 11th grade. Where was I going with this? Oh, so my grandmother graduated and her uncle, her mom's brother, lived in Washington, D.C. My grandmother grew up in South Carolina. And he was he started as a streetcar conductor in Washington, D.C. And then he became a Washington, D.C. cop. So, he's living it up in D.C. He and his wife, they never had children. They ended up building a Sears house. So those Sears kit houses. As far as I know, their house is still there. It was a fantastic house. I would have done anything, even as a kid, to have owned it because it was a really cool house. Anyway, long story short, my grandmother's uncle comes down for a visit to South Carolina, and she had gone to Washington, D.C. for a school field trip. And she had just, been fallen in love with D.C. And this is wartime, at this point. And he came down and he said, why don't you come back with me? What do you have going on here in South Carolina besides getting ready to work in the mill or the cotton bleachery? Those factory jobs was all that was really available to her, or farming. And so she said, okay. And her mother said, if you go, you'll never come back. And she was right. My grandmother never moved back to South Carolina. She ended up meeting my grandfather. They got married. But anyway, even longer story short, the night that she was to move, to leave with her uncle, my great grandmother stayed up late and made her a traveling suit. And I don't know that by the time my grandmother passed away, the suit was long gone. She had probably gotten rid of it before she even got married, but there are pictures of the suit. And to me, it looks like something right off the rack. It does not look like anything homemade. And I was like, wait a minute, she made you a suit like overnight? And she was like, yeah, she did things like that. And I'm like, what? And she's like, well, she sewed clothes for the entire family. So, she kind of just knew our sizes. And I was like, we're talking about a suit. We're not talking about like something, a pair of, I don't know, sleep pants with elastic in them. This is like a tailored suit. So anyway, this like how to avoid the homemade look, like my great grandmother, again, she lived in like a log cabin, like a shotgun shack kind of situation. And yet she had the skills to make things like that. And it boggles my mind. I wish I could have met her, because my gosh, I think about somebody who is sort of a master garment maker or master tailor today. They have lots of skill and lots of frame of reference, probably have, you've either taken classes or done some kind of education in tailoring or master sewing. So to know that my great grandmother, she just knew how to do this and didn't even have to fit it on my grandmother before she left. She was like, here's your traveling suit. Good luck. I love you. right? Okay, practical hints for your fitting problems. Um, this is interesting to me because, like, we're talking about sack dresses. We're talking about things that are fairly columnar, and it's gonna pull out of, if you have like some bulges, um, full bust, narrow, there's places where that stuff isn't gonna fit right. So I think that these alterations are probably a little simple, you know, versus the alterations one would need to make going into the 30s, 40s, 50s. Like those are more complex garments. Sewing shortcuts that save time. Um, a pictorial presentation that will enable you to make school togs that have a smart, well-tailored look. So I'm guessing that um, is this for your children, I guess? Um, yeah, these are for younger people. And it's showing putting facings in and things like that. Faced buttonholes, fanciness. Things that a home dressmaker should know about the dress form and the sewing machine, also important uses of attachments. So here's our attachments here. And like how many, raise your hand if you have all of these attachments for an old sewing machine and have literally never touched them, either because you don't do this kind of work or you have no idea how it works. I'm raising my hand. So this is what these things are. So the foot hemmer, this, I know exactly what this looks like. This right here, that little bit right there is actually curved over. And so this is for making very narrow hems, and it kind of stabilizes, because if you've ever tried to hem something very tiny on a sewing machine, depending on your stitch plate, where the feed dogs are, if it's wide open there and you don't have like a different thing to cover it up, it'll suck your fabric right down into the bobbin. So feet like this help. The wide hemmer, that's number 2. So that's got like a longer thing. I think sometimes it's adjustable. You kind of move it in and out. This is a ruffler or gatherer, I'm going to say. What do they say? Yes, the gatherer. Particularly useful for making ruffles and will save hours of time. This is true. But honestly, when I have to like quote unquote ruffle something, I just do like a really long basting stitch, like rows of basting stitches. So much easier. The tucker, that is this thing. And I'll be honest, I can't exactly tell how this thing is working, although I know what it looks like. I've seen it in one of the accessory kits for one of my older machines. It's got all kinds of, it looks like a torture device basically. But all of these little bits and pieces, they're working with the feed dogs. So the movement of the feed dogs, they're doing their thing too. So these are kind of ingenious. I would say, like the ones I have, they're all rusty. They're not in good condition. And again, that's because they sat in drawers. People did not use them as much, unless they were doing like some hardcore sewing. So, they get out of condition. But I think it's fun. I think it's a fun challenge if you, pulled some of these out and took care of them. You can like oil them and, do some light, very, very fine sandpaper to kind of get any rust off. And you gotta soak them in oil, and you can get the gunk off and get them working again. And I think it would be a fun, kind of a fun challenge to get some of these things to work. And then the last one is the binder. The scroll-shaped attachment allows you to bind edges with only one stitching. Okay, so binding a quilt, I guess. And I guess I guess it's sort of feeding through the way these two do. But it's keeping your binding stable, so you could just hit that one stitch. And now I kind of wonder, whenever, I don't love machine sewn quilt binding. I'll do that first sewing by machine, but when you flip it, I always do that by hand. So people that do this sewing, like, both sides at the same time. I wonder if they're using a contraption like this. I have seen people on Instagram definitely doing that. I've also seen people that, you know, they just sew. And it's really, really hard. If you don't have things like perfectly lined up, it's really hard to sew binding on that way. Just my opinion. That's why I don't do it. Okay. More things a dressmaker should know. This is interesting. This is about needles and threads for sewing machine and hand sewing. And it talks about these, what types of needles to use with what types of threads, and like the weight of the thread, and what kind of fabrics it's meant for too. I thought that was really kind of cool. I know that Schmetz sewing machine needles, they make a nice little book about sewing machine needles. And I want to say there's one of the needle companies, maybe John James or Colonial Needle, maybe. I'm not sure. One of them also does like a hand sewing thing, but I have maybe some of those reference materials. I don't know where they are. There's something I should keep, easy to grab, because this is kind of good information. And look at these sweet little illustrations of these ladies. They're sewing their little projects. Timely suggestions for mature figures. So not only if you're fat and tall, but what to do if you're old. So, you got a plump neck, broad shoulders, you built like a linebacker. Got a short neck. You're getting like really like up in your face here. All right, so if you're a skinny old lady, I guess this is skirt 12 inches from the floor. Okay. Hats for the woman who is 50 or more. What is this? Handkerchief, linen, and wide lace. Okay, so this is like being able to put decor. I guess you don't want to over decorate yourself if you're an old lady. Okay, so now we're getting into some home decor stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that we always run across when, if you buy lots of linens. If you go into any antique store, you can find bins and baskets and piles of this kind of stuff. And at auctions, estate sales, you can buy boxes and boxes of this stuff for pennies on the dollar. I mean, sometimes people can't give it away. But I mean, look at what this, this is what they've got here. So they're trying to sell a pattern. So the instructions aren't in there, but this is cut work. This is like, this is kind of advanced needlework. This isn't something that's most people just simply do today. But people did lots of this stuff in the early 20th century, and all the way up into the, I would say, the 40s and 50s. It was pretty common. Maybe people backed off a little bit, after the 50s, but this kind of stuff was still available, like at least the embroidery type stuff. Even today you can find these. Yeah, Martha, but yeah, it kind of breaks my heart that, somebody may have made one of these sets from one of these patterns, and today we just don't use this stuff anymore, so we kind of were like, and it stays, it just stays in a closet or something. Kind of makes me sad. Now here are some smart frock suggestions, and I like the fact that these were in color, and you can see kind of what's going on here better. Got some, I don't know, this kind of looked like it's sort of some inset stuff, almost like quilt pieces, almost like a Lone Star. I thought that was kind of neat. And then these, so very late 20s, I mean, it's like the Great Gatsby era. I love these. I don't have the body type to wear these though. Dropped waist things do not work on me. Okay, now we're getting into some more home stuff, and this is a pillow service for every home to glorify the fine American spirit of colonial days. So, colonial days, 1920s were, see, this is the 150th anniversary, 1925, or I'm sorry, 1926 of, the, what do you call the 150? I don't remember. So you've got the bicentennial, you've got the centennial, you've got the bicentennial, and in the middle you have 150. And right now, next year, we've got 250. So this colonial revival has popped up several times. It popped up in the 20s. It popped up in 76. So that's what this is about. But we look at these things, and I mean, this is just ubiquitous to us. Log cabin, tulips, Road to California. Like, these are just essentially a quilt block that has been turned into a pillow. And again, the expectation is you're looking at these things and then you're going to send money in for a pattern. They're not including the information on how to make them. But think about this. Maybe not necessarily these pillows, but when you see a quilt or quilt blocks and you're like, what kind of pattern did that woman use? Like, what was going on there? I guarantee you it's because she looked at magazines or newspapers and she went, I don't have the money right now, or I don't want to waste money on something I think I can do on my own. So she would draft these things herself, or she would ask a friend, do you have a pattern like this? And I think some of this like DIY resulted in the weirdness that you sometimes see. And I'm particularly thinking of Sunbonnet Sue. Poor Sunbonnet Sue. I mean, you guys have seen some of the Sunbonnet Sues in my collection, and they are obscene. They're like, why would you think the body goes together like this? And I think it's because people saw this kind of stuff and went like, I can do that myself. And they didn't do it very well. But that's the charm. It's that DIY, like, failed charm. Okay, this is the one I wanted to talk about, and putting it out there, this magazine is from 1928. 1928. This is before World War II. This is before the rise of Nazi Germany. And what you see here is indeed a swastika. And what I want to point out here is in 1928, the swastika had absolutely no connection to the meaning it has today. We would never decorate with a swastika today because of what it means to us now. But in 1928, this was simply a symbol. And what you have here, and I'm zooming in here, it says, the Indian good luck motif is very striking, cut from red calico on a black background. This pillow would be an excellent selection for a man's room or a porch. And you could get this, this complete kit for $1.20. And so this is, what I would say is anytime you see that, you're not looking at Nazi quilts. You're looking at quilts that, or home decor that was completed or created prior to World War II. So if nothing else, it's a simple dating method when you see something like that. People don't like to share these anymore because the greater community, non-quilt people, non-historians look at this and lose their mind. And again, this is just history. We're just looking at history. I'm not here promoting any, anti-Semitism. Absolutely not. We're looking at how a symbol gets taken and the meaning completely changed. I mean, how absurd is it that something that was known as a good luck symbol becomes this symbol of hate and, is used today as a symbol of hate. It's very unfortunate. It makes me mad, honestly, because there's lots of really cool stuff people did, with these quilts and stuff, prior to the rise of Nazi Germany. So, we can only look at them in this historical context. When I was at the quilt turning this past weekend, one of the quilts, it was not the swastika pattern, but there was fabric that had itty bitty little swastikas on it. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have never seen this fabric before. And a couple people said, oh yeah, this is, one of those like conversation prints, shirting prints of the early 20th century. And I was like, oh wow, but it was a really beautiful fabric. It was this beautiful like cornflower blue color, I think. And from a distance, being pulling back away from the quilt, just laying on the table, you really couldn't tell what it was. It really just looked like kind of a little floral thing. But once you got up close and looked at it, you were like, oh, okay, yeah, that is what I thought it was. And that's so interesting to me, but people don't show that stuff anymore, again, because of the kind of, outrage and backlash you get by showing those things online. And, it's one of those things, like, it's a double-edged sword. We can't deny these things, and we have to look at history for what it is. And I think it's important that we look at history and, with the intention of not to repeat it when, but the backlash and the cancel culture and stuff, it's really unfortunate, because I think we lose out on some knowledge here. So anyway, I'll step off my soapbox for that. Modish hats from the studio of a chic designer. It's funny because these are all kind of the same hat. They're all that cloche type of hat. And that's what was popular in the 20s. But I think they're cute. Definitely does not work with my head, but Smart Styles from Paris for the growing girl. I'm assuming this is for teenage girls, young women. You look at that short hairstyle. Ooh la la, she's a flapper, baby. Hand stitches and when to use them. So 1928, there's gotta be a sewing machine in every home. Sewing machine patents were, like, I think Singer, the big patent was 1844. By the time we get to the Civil War in the United States, got lots of sewing machines in play. And then after the Civil War, even more sewing machines in play. And by the time you get to the turn of the century, a sewing machine was ubiquitous. Like, what's wrong with your household if you don't have one? Because it was freeing women up to do other things. It was why not have a sewing machine that could make your mending and garment creation and all that stuff so much easier. And even though they were expensive, they were also affordable. Like, there was always payment plans and stuff for sewing machines. So I think this is interesting, and looking at, what are we going to use hand stitches for, even though we rely on our sewing machines. So this is cool. They're talking about basting and, marking stitches, and so on. This is really good advice. That's a technique that, when you lay out a pattern, a clothing pattern, you cut it out, you often will have markings for darts, to the fullness of the body, to take care of that. And sometimes it's hard to mark those, and there's a variety of ways to mark them, but this is the most, the easiest way is to do this stitch marking with a basting stitch, a double basting stitch, and then you clip them, and then you have both sides marked. Here's more hand stitching. And these are interesting. The faggoting stitch is it's typically a decorative stitch, and it's used to join two pieces of fabric, side by side like that. These edges would be turned under to the wrong side, and then you're using that. It's almost like a figure eight kind of thing that you do to stitch the edges together, and you can leave that space open, and it becomes a decorative stitch, or pull it tight and it's just a type of stitching two pieces of fabric together, creating a different kind of seam. Here's some more hand stitches. There's like a whole section on hand stitches. That was interesting. So this is all kind of hemming stuff. Hem stitch, the slip stitch, blind stitch, felling stitches. They're all very similar, but with a tiny bit of difference. And Here's some more. Roll togethers. This was an interesting technique that I had never used before until I did some historical costuming. And it's a very interesting, like, instead of doing just the regular in and out, you start to roll the top, and you literally are kind of taking the needle through it like this. You sort of are kind of hooking the needle around the top edge of the fabric. Creates a different kind, like it's like a very firm sort of gathering. I'm trying to think what it was used for, like I think some sleeve insertion. I'm kind of blanking on what I actually used it for. It was something I was following up, like a tutorial, and that's what they used. And even more. As I was taking pictures of these, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. So yeah. So you've got catch stitching, blanket stitching, staying the buttonhole, which is like a strengthening, fastening loops, French tack. That's when you have, like, you've probably seen coats that have a lining that may be loose at the bottom, and so the French tack kind of holds the lining at the bottom to keep it from, like, separating and flapping around. These are some ways of finishing your seams. Now, the amateurish look of homemade clothing was a problem even back then. If you don't have a serger, how else do you finish off the edges so that they don't, fray in the wash, or just even with wear? And so these are a whole bunch of different kinds of finishing stitches. Pinking and overcasting. I like this one. This, what are they calling it? Catch stitched seam. So this one is if you have a lining, you're just catching the lining, like here, you're catching the lining, and then this, you're just catching the seam. That says French seam, closed seam, bound with felled binding. Okay. I still think this is like a French seam. So yeah, this is all like really good information. This is stuff that like has not changed. More seams, more hems and bindings. Important facts about finishing touches. So you've got some stuff about bound buttonholes and slashed openings. So this would be like a placket, like on the front of a blouse or a dress. How that works with a facing, pockets. This is all stuff that, like, back in the day would have been, advanced sewing for sure. But, homemade stuff, they were trying to make it as nice as possible. And, for women that were still sewing much of their family's clothing, particularly children's stuff. I don't know that, the rise of the department store, I feel like women's garments were probably the first off the rack kind of thing, and then that children's garments would have come next. But this kind of stuff, you don't necessarily see this kind of information unless you're looking at something like Threads magazine. You're not going to see this kind of stuff in a women's magazine today. People just don't have these skills or interest, I guess. This is interesting. This is how to refurbish old garments. And 1928 is not exactly a terrible time in the United States. We're not in the Depression yet, but still people are refashioning and reusing, even though many, some households, I don't want to say many, but some households would not have had to do this, but it's still kind of common. This is cool. Look at this belt. It like hangs down with little bows. How cute. Oh, I love this. Tied cuffs, and then at the neck. That's adorable also. Very cute stuff. Making a coat. This is not something that you would normally see. There's a lot that goes into the structure of a heavy coat. If you've ever owned a coat, like this, like a heavy wool coat, um, there's a lot going on under the lining to pad it out and keep it from just sagging. You want it to have some structure. So this is tailoring type of skills in here. The professional touch for your son's suit. Suggestions for little tots and boys from 8 to 12. So I'm assuming a little tot is from baby to 7. And then 8 to 12 is when you make them, I guess, I don't know. I guess they're always wearing short pants until they're 12. I don't know. But I mean, just very cute little sailor suit. I have a garment probably from this time period, maybe a little bit older than this, but it's one of those this kind of little sailor suit, kind of little Lord Fauntleroy looking thing. I cannot imagine my son wearing something like that today, like when he was a kid. My mom made a couple of sort of heirloom type things, and I, put them on him as a baby and of course saved them. But, it's just that kind of stuff is not necessarily, I mean, babies are spitting and getting dirty, and it's not exactly easy to keep them in clothes like that these days. Darning and mending. Nobody knows how to do this anymore. Lots of cool tutorials though, like out on Instagram. There's lots of people, and YouTube, lots of people that do darn and mend and teach it. But for the most part, it is not a ubiquitous kind of skill. How many people would just throw something away if it had a tear like that instead of fixing it? Tucks, pleats, and smocking. I was like, what? Because I've been doing smocking, so this is interesting. This would be, they're teaching you to do smocking by hand. You got to do dots, and then you got to do the smocking. So no smocking machine here. 3 household frocks and a kitchen apron. So these were fun. Well, they got their sad iron there. And then this, look at these confections. So I think this is the dawn of many pillows on your bed. Because you see, you've got one here for the bedroom, and then of course the bazaar. You can sell them to other people to put them on their beds. But look at these things. I mean, they are just floofy and frilly. Ribbons and gathering, and I guess this is some smocking, maybe embroidery. Goodness gracious, look at this stuff. Unusual distinction. I mean, this stuff is fun to look at. I don't love having these things on my bed, because you're to take this stuff off, and it's always dusty. And oh, look, you can use it on your window seat, or oh, that's just a table. So on your window seat in your living room. And that's the end of the book. Wow, it took me an hour to do that. I didn't intend. I thought we were going to be able to get into one of the other books. So yeah, that one had the most sewing in it. The other 2 magazines had a little bit of, it was mostly in the ads. I realized it was, there was some information about quilting in the ads. Not as many. I mean, I guess, I've only looked at these types of magazines like in Dr. Dunton's collection, or just, thumbing through them in a antique store. Needle Arts magazine, I've collected a few copies of that over the years, but I guess, you hear about, things being published in these magazines, but it's not like every single magazine was chock full of this information, about quilting or sewing. So it's kind of like, that special publication, that was an interesting one. They definitely did, some of the companies did special publications for quilting and other types of sewing. So I feel like those are the ones, like, if you really want to look at old patterns, it's kind of seek out these special publications, because I think the regular magazines really, it's hit or miss whether they really have, certainly, I mean, quilting things, but also just really any needlework projects in the magazine, other than a picture and here's where you can get the pattern. So I think that was a fact, or a thing I didn't realize. I'm kind of used to, needlework magazines that have the pattern in there and have all the instructions. And even magazines like Work Basket. My grandmother subscribed to Work Basket. She had a number of them. And there's a few other magazines probably from, the 60s and 70s that kind of had, all of the instructions. It wasn't one of those like, here's a picture of a thing, you figure it out, which I think is how Godey's did things. Or this, here's all the things, but you got to send away for the pattern. I feel like there's less of that in later 20th century. So I was again genuinely surprised when I started looking into these magazines and they don't have what I sort of expected them to. So interesting stuff. All right, guys, are you ready for some more mystery? So we are reading The Secret of the Crazy Quilt by Florence Hightower. It was written published in 1972, so it is a year older than me. And it is young adult literature. I guess that's the best way I would define it. It's, it's a mystery. So I kind of think that, Florence Hightower probably, everything she wrote were mystery stories. And I think she probably was looking at like the popularity of Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys and stuff. So that's probably where she kind of, I guess, got the idea to write these kind of stories. It's very well written, and I think thus far, if you're just seeing this video today, and go back to 2 more, and because we're just on our third reading. I was hoping to do chapters, but some of the chapters are really long and some are really short, so kind of hit or miss there. But it's just, I don't know. It's been a really long time since I've read a book like this. And I have to say, I'm sort of pleased because it's, like I said, it's well written and it's intriguing. We haven't figured out what this mystery, the buildup has been immense in the first 2 chapters. So without further ado, I am actually going to give you another screen again. Let me reorganize my screens here so that you'll have something to look at besides me. I have realized that it is better to look at an illustration than me just reading, in my opinion. So, Mystery of the Crazy Quilt. I'm sorry, The Secret of the Crazy Quilt. I don't know why I keep calling it the mystery. It's a secret. Well, gosh darn it, Stephanie. Okay. So where we left off, so the first chapter was Jerusha and her brother Freddie arriving at their grandparents' house in the 1920s, 1926. The second chapter now is Edith's narrative, which is Edith is Jerusha and Freddie's aunt. And I'm trying to remember, it's their father's sister. Their grandmother has just died at some point before 1926. I want to say it's within the year that their dear grandmother has died. And so Jerusha kind of told the story of arriving there, the 2 of them as their children. And now the second chapter, Edith has picked up. It's 1944, and she's kind of starting over with telling the story in a little bit more clarity with the background. So what we have gotten so far is that Edith is a teacher. She was teaching, I believe, in Boston or thereabouts. She had gotten the call from her significant other, her boyfriend, I guess, had been staying at her parents' house. And he has called to say, your mother's had a stroke. And he's a doctor. So her boyfriend is a doctor. And so she's on her way home. She's taking a train to Sewell, Massachusetts. And joining her on the train is a man named Bron Zebra, which his last name is actually Zabrowski, I think. He's a Polish immigrant. And he had grown up there at this house, the Haven, where the Fonces lived. And the house is kind of has a long storied history in Sewell, and it's been in their family. So that's where we're at. And she had just kind of explained her history with the Zabrowskis. And now she's switching back to kind of the present time, which the present in this case is early 1926, late 1925. And she's on the train with Bron. So this is where we left off. And Bron is very upset about Edith's mother being sick. Okay. So here we go. The Secret of the Crazy Quilt by Florence Hightower. This is chapter 2, Edith's narrative, and we're in the middle of that. So here we go. As I looked at Bron, sitting tight-lipped on the seat beside me, he had put away his book. I had to admit that for all his extravagant gestures, he managed his affairs well. He had all the clothes and books he needed. He paid his tuition charges and his rent, and without neglecting his studies to earn money, he had bought that boat, Irene. I couldn't see how he made enough by taking out summer people to pay expenses, let alone fix her up the way he had. However, that was none of my business. I must be careful, I told myself, not to add envy to the other blemishes in my character. And I think in the early part of the chapter, Bron had said something to her that she was kind of like, oh, you're pointing out like we're those upper crusty people and you're an immigrant son. And it's like, there had been a little bit of strife between them for that comment. Bron turned to me and seemed to ask forgiveness with his smile. I smiled back. He reached out timidly and took my hand. I squeezed his, and we rode on, still not speaking, but in a friendlier mood with our joined hands lying on the seat between us. So we had sat, our hands joined on the double bench, all through Bron's first week at Sewell Harbor Primary School. So, okay, this is giving us sort of a little bit of background, because it's clear to me that Bron is younger than Edith, but I couldn't tell how much. Like, we didn't have it, but I think that we're going to find out here. So Bron's first week at Sewell Harbor Primary School. I still remember how Miss Garish said she relied on me, a big third grader, to show Bron the ropes and help him with his letters. So I'm guessing she's only like maybe a year or two older than Bron. She told Mother later, with me standing right there listening, that without me, Bron would never have got over his foreign ways so quickly or learned his letters so well. I almost burst with pride because right from the minute I first had seen Bron and touched his hair, remember he's got this blonde hair, I had felt that he was a kind fairy's gift to me. My brother was 10 years older than I, and no families with children lived near us. A playmate, preferably younger, whom I could protect and teach and boss a little, had been my dream, a dream so unlikely to come true that I hadn't even bothered to pray for it. Had I put in time praying, I'd have known that Bron was sent by the Lord, and a playmate of such exalted origin could not have filled my bill half so well. If I was bossy, Bron, once he had established himself, was stubborn. As children, we scrapped and made up over and over, but we were never bored with each other. When we weren't fighting, which often was rather fun, we thought up other interesting things to do. When I was in high school, Mother let Bron do his homework with me in the parlor, although she wouldn't let any of my other friends. She said Bron and I were serious and ambitious and could help each other. Often when we had finished our lessons, she would bring in a pot of cocoa and a plate of her sugar cookies, which Bron loved, and sit down to watch us eat and talk with us. The decline of Sewell from the bustling seaport of her girlhood to a sleepy village saddened Mother, and the decline of Sewellians from captains and shipbuilders of renown to smaller shopkeepers, caretakers, chicken farmers, and jacks of all trades, dependent for their livelihood on gouging the summer people, mortified her. As a young girl, she had loved everything about shipyards and boats. She had kept her own catboat in the cove and often sailed in it to Houghton Landing for an afternoon shopping. Remember, Houghton Landing is like the train stop before the train stop where you get on the other train to go to Sewell. So it's close by. Though something of a tomboy for her generation, Mother also sewed fine seams and painted on glass as well as the other girls in Sewell. And she dutifully paid calls with her mother and helped her entertain at the Haven. The Haven, of course, is their house, their property. Always, though, she was drawn by the boats and the business at the foot of the hill. Whenever she could, she would slip down to watch the carpenters at work, or to listen, quiet as a mouse in a corner, to discussions in her father's office. She sensed, sooner than her father, that business was falling off, and she believed that slipshod management was one of the causes. She asked to be allowed to go to Houghton Junction to take a course in stenography and office management. Braun and I loved to have her act out that scene for us as she took the parts in turn of her father, her mother, and herself. The Haskells, father, mother, and daughter, sat in the parlor after supper. So Edith's mother, Jerusha and Freddie's grandmother, they were the Haskells. And I guess they married into the Fonts family, so the Fonts is their last name. Jerusha's unmarried name. So the Haskell sat in the parlor after supper. Mother and grandmother were piecing a quilt of the oak leaf design in red and white. I have it still. So oak leaf design, do you think it could have been an oak leaf and real? Grandfather was reading aloud from Snarly Yow, or The Dog Fiend, by Captain Marryat, his favorite author. I wonder what that was about. I wonder if that's real or if that's just something she's made up. Tomorrow, said Grandfather with an anticipatory chuckle, we will read in which Mr. Vansley Perkin goes on shore to woo the widow Vandersloot. And he reached for his nightcap of rum, lemon, sugar, and hot water, which stood on the table beside him. So is that like a hot toddy, I guess? My mother put down her sewing. Father. She sat very straight and looked him in the eye. A course in stenography and business management starts next Monday week at Miss Sparrow's Secretarial College at Houghton Junction. Indeed, said Grandfather Haskell. Yes, replied my mother, and I have enrolled in the course. I have paid the registration fee, and I will pay the first term's tuition when I go to my first class a week from Monday. I sold 3 applique quilts and an embroidered scarf to Grandma Davis, who is blind and can't sew any longer. You will not be financially burdened. But they were for your hope chest, cried out Grandmother Haskell. I'll have plenty of time to make more before I marry, replied Mother, tossing her head. I am in no hurry. Oh, scandal. Young lady, said Grandfather, more puzzled than angry. Who put this idea in your head? No one, replied Mother. I read an advertisement in the Houghton Register. I sailed over to talk to Miss Sparrow, who runs the school. She explained how I could learn to file papers, keep accounts, take dictation and shorthand, and type it all neatly with the new typewriting machine. The new typewriting machine, I love that. This is probably, yeah, I mean, if Jerusha and Freddie are children in 1926, I mean, this is the late 1800s. Yeah, I mean, it's at least 1880 or earlier. I would say earlier for sure. Okay, the new typewriting machine. I registered then because I believe that with these skills, I can be very useful to you at the shipyard. I shall go to school every morning on the 7:02 train, which will get me to Houghton Junction at 7:45, in plenty of time for my first class at 8. No, no, cried Grandmother Haskell. The train is too dangerous. If it tips over, I beg you, Captain Haskell, forbid her to take the train. I've never heard of a train tipping over. Maybe they did back then. I don't know. Be quiet, Mrs. Haskell. The train is irrelevant. Have you ever called your husband or your wife, a man calling their wife by, I've never called my husband Mr. Dyke unless I was being obnoxious. Maybe he's being obnoxious. Be quiet, Mrs. Haskell. The train is irrelevant. Here, Mother would scowl fiercely and somehow make herself swell until she looked very like the portrait of Grandfather Haskell, which hangs in the dining room. Young lady, you will oblige me by never again speaking of the accomplishments taught at that establishment you so foolishly visited. The very words debase you. The accomplishments taught at that establishment are for girls of the lowest class as a last resort. Before he stopped short, drew a deep breath, and shouted, "I will never allow a daughter of mine to become a typewriter." Wow. Mother said she spent the next week working on her parents, persuading them to change their minds about the secretarial college. She explained to her father how she believed that modern business methods were needed to keep the shipyard from going under. She collected favorable opinions of Miss Sparrow and her college from Sewellians who knew Miss Sparrow or had heard of her undertaking. Finally, on a brisk September morning, she sailed both of her parents to Houghton Landing to meet Miss Sparrow. Miss Sparrow proved to be not only a thorough lady, but a distant cousin of Grandmother Haskell. Grandfather Haskell was impressed by her air of authority. My mother was permitted to attend the college and ride the train. She only had to promise that she would practice her secretarial skills once she had acquired them in her father's business and nowhere else. Mother went on to tell us that with her keeping proper records and collecting bills promptly and influencing her father to bend with the wind, the shipyard might have converted to building small pleasure boats and pulled through. The robbery, of course, finished everything. Dun dun dun! There was a robbery. Mother never enlarged on it or on Henry Hardin, who did it. He had come up from New York for the summer to study the business. I've gathered from others that he was well recommended, well connected, and charming. Grandmother and grandfather were delighted with him. They treated him like one of the family, and gossip has it that they hoped he would marry Mother. The safe he robbed was not the one in the office at the Cove. It was the wall safe in what is now Father's study. It is still there, hidden behind the picture labeled Jerusha. If you remember, Jerusha is named after a ship. Jerusha in a gale off Hong Kong, 1866. Henry Hardin had abused his employer's hospitality to discover both the whereabouts of the safe and the combination. He also had learned somehow that on the day he robbed the safe, it would contain not only grandfather's stock and bond certificates, the family's jewelry, and the week's payroll for the shipyard, but $10,000 in gold bars that grandfather was keeping for a few days for a friend. Nothing was ever recovered, and Henry Hardin was never heard of again. Braun and I sometimes speculated about a romance between Henry Hardin and Mother, and once Braun was fresh enough to ask her point blank if she hadn't been just a little sweet on Henry Hardin. Mother, usually so indulgent of Braun, froze him with a hard blue stare and ordered him to bed. In the same way, I was sure Grandfather Haskell had disposed of impertinence on his quarterdeck. Neither Braun nor I dared touch on the subject with her again. We agreed, though, that Mother very likely was taken in by Henry Hardin like everyone else. Since she always assured us that she hadn't been a beauty when she was young, and had never had many beaux, she thought it likely she might even have fallen a little in love with the charming Henry. She told us that after the robbery, she had had a nervous breakdown and kept to her room for a whole year. Wow. Meanwhile, her enraged father tried to find the thief, pay back his friend, and restore his business and his credit in such a senseless rush of activity that he gave himself a heart attack and died. Had he lived longer, Mother said, he would have lost the haven and his land on Haskell's Hill, along with everything else. His death forced Mother to come downstairs. She went to work and supported her mother and herself by being a public stenographer. Let this be a warning, Mother admonished Braun and me over the empty cocoa cups, never to indulge as she had in self-pity. Determination to do our cheerful and unselfish best in whatever work the Lord sent us would, according to Mother, enable Braun and me to rise and shine as worthy Sewellians should. Mother proved her own point, for no sooner had she cast off self-pity than the Lord sent her her life work in the form of father. He had only been in Sewell 2 weeks, but already he was hopelessly behind in his paperwork. The vestry hired her to take letters for him. And remember, he's a minister. How Mother loved to tell about their first meeting. He was as handsome as a saint, she'd say, and he had a voice like an organ. And he was so good and so helpless. I knew right away that he liked me because of the way he confided in me about his shirt. It was frayed at the collar and cuffs and stained down the front. He said he wasn't sure it was the same one he had given Mrs. Acker to wash. That one had been quite new, and he wasn't positive. He thought he had seen it on Mr. Acker only the day before. So this poor minister has given his clothing to a woman who takes and wash, and she's given him back instead of a brand new shirt, she's given him back this shabby shirt, but he's too nice to do anything about it. He said Mrs. Acker was so efficient about everything. He didn't see how she could have made such a mistake, and he was a little afraid of her and hated to ask. Mother would chuckle as she described how she managed Mrs. Acker. I believe she made up her mind to marry father at that first meeting. So this is the next chapter. The death of my mother. I felt a tug on my hand. Braun was standing up. The train slowed down as it approached Sewell Station. I put aside my memories and prepared to meet reality. It was almost dark on the platform, and I didn't recognize Dick until he was taking my hand. And I remember Dick is her boyfriend. You were good to come yourself, I said. I hope that everything... How is she? Interrupted Braun. How is Mrs. Fonts? I didn't know you were here too, said Dick. I'll explain everything to Edith while we are driving to the house. He put his hand under my elbow to direct me to the car. I suppose you'll want to drive up with us, he said over his shoulder to Braun. Well, why wouldn't he? That's kind of rude. I'm wondering maybe if Dick has kind of got like a, an issue with Braun, since he's like this. He grew up with Edith, basically. That's right, said Braun. He ran ahead and climbed into the back seat of Dick's Model T. Dick settled me in front before he climbed into the driver's seat beside me. Leaning forward, Braun stuck his head between Dick and me. How is she? Is she conscious? I hope you aren't letting her suffer. What are her chances? I could tell by the way Dick banged his foot down on the starter that he was annoyed. Come, Braun, I said. Don't rush him so. And you might thank him for coming to meet us, too. I laid my hand, soothingly I hoped, on Dick's arm and waited for Braun to say something polite and apologetic. Braun said nothing. Thank you, Edith, said Dick. He snapped on the headlights. The fliver, still not sure how that is pronounced, but what we discovered last week, on Monday, is that a flivver or a fliver, and it's spelled Flivver, is basically like an old jalopy. So the Model T is what is referred to with the flivver or the fliver, whatever. So the flivver or fliver trembled all over, made some preliminary lunges, and set off. How is Mrs. Fonts? Demanded Braun. He was literally breathing down our necks. Dick ignored him. I don't want to alarm you, Edith, he began in his best professional manner. On the other hand, I must prepare you for various situation at the Haven. She has come out of the coma, which is a good sign. However, I'm thinking she just had a stroke. I'm assuming she was just unconscious. I don't think she was this is like happening within the same day, I think, so. So she's come out of a coma, which is a good sign. However, there is complete hemiplegia of the right side, that is paralysis, and vocal motor aphasia as well. She can't speak. However, partial recovery is by no means impossible. Good nursing will make all the difference. There is only one private nurse around now whom I would trust with the case, and she is, of course, busy. I strongly advised Reverend Fonts to send his wife to the hospital immediately. He begged me to let him nurse her because she would be so much happier at home with him. Dick sighed. Of course Mr. Fonts can't nurse her, but it is impossible for me to make him understand. Edith, I know you will want to nurse her too, but you are not a trained nurse, and it would be professionally negligent of me to give you the responsibility in such a serious case, especially at this early critical stage. Now, think about this. This is the 1920s. I mean, I think that the hope of somebody surviving a stroke, it's probably not, they probably didn't survive as often as they do today, because, if a person wouldn't even go to the hospital, that's not a good. I'll help you, put in Braun. Together we can manage it. We'll do exactly as you tell us, and you'll see she'll get better much faster at home than she ever would in a hospital. Dick said nothing, but again I knew he was annoyed. This time, by the way he jerked the flivver around the corner from Station Avenue onto Haskell Street. Again I laid my hand on his arm. Edith, said Dick, I hope you will instruct me now to telephone for a room at the hospital and an ambulance to take your mother there. I will do it as soon as we get to the Haven. It is important. We can persuade your father if it's important later, and then if your mother gets so she can move around a little and there is less danger of pneumonia and kidney infection, perhaps she can come home. Now, I believe she should be in a hospital under expert care. Don't send her to a hospital, Edie, cried Braun into my ear. She'll hate it. It will kill her. We can take care of her. I know we can. Beside me, I heard Dick swallow his anger. It's up to you, Edith, he said. Please telephone as soon as we get home. Dick took his hand from the wheel for a moment to press mine. Good, he said. It was the words pneumonia and infection that made me decide for the hospital. And if Braun thought I was too cold-hearted and selfish to want to give up my time to nursing, I couldn't help it. Dick went on to say that he had telephoned my brother Haskell in Chicago. Now, Haskell is Jerusha and Freddie's father. And that he was coming as fast as he could. The flivver bumped off the section of Haskell Street that was maintained by the town. From here on, past the cove and up our hill, Dick gave all his attention to guiding it through the bumps and potholes of our private end of Haskell Street, which was not maintained at all. As we turned into our driveway, a shiver ran up my spine. Sorry, guys, my allergies are giving me the throat tickles. Dick gave all his attention to guiding it up through the bumps and potholes at our private end of Haskell Street, which was not maintained at all. As we turned into our driveway, a shiver ran up my spine. Except for a single light glaring out from the unshaded window of Mother's bedroom, the Haven was dark. How different it looked with lights cozily glowing through drawn shades on ordinary Friday nights when Dick drove me home for the weekend. We entered through the side door, which was open and banging in a cold east wind. As we groped for the chain of the hall light, Sunbeam, Mother's old ginger cat, twined around our legs, mewing and nearly tripping up Dick, who swore under his breath. Cats certainly have not changed over time. Braun found the light chain, and we all blinked at each other. Sunbeam yowled indignantly and tried to shunt my feet toward the kitchen. I'll telephone now, said Dick. The ambulance should be here in half an hour. He made for the phone in the dining room. Braun scooped up Sunbeam. Go up to see her, Edith. Tell her I'm feeding Sunbeam and will be right along. And try to look a bit more cheerful and forgive me again for butting in. I climbed the stairs and entered the bedroom. Mother was propped up in bed in a half-sitting position. Father sat beside her, holding her crippled right hand. I bent over to kiss her, but as I looked into her face, my blood chilled. It was not her twisted mouth or the horrible sound which came from it that chilled me. It was the look in her eyes, a look of terror. I had seen my mother look many ways, but never terrified. I mumbled, not cheerfully as I had intended, that Braun was downstairs and Haskell was on his way from Chicago, that Dr. Davis recommended a few days in the hospital, and that the ambulance would arrive soon. With her good left hand, Mother gripped mine. More incomprehensible sounds came from her twisted mouth. Her eyes bulged with the effort she was making. Exhausted, she let go of my hand, sagged over sideways, and might have fallen out of the bed if Father and I hadn't caught her. We straightened her and tried to make her comfortable. This is sad because, this is definitely what happens when a person has a stroke. And, how terrifying must it be, to not be able to communicate and suddenly be in this situation where you're incapacitated. Like, how scary. No need to talk, dear, I said, kissing her again. Braun and I are here to help Father, and Haskell is coming. Okay, and then... Sorry, guys. I'm going to get you the picture here. Look at this new picture. Ugh. I should have had these queued up better. So here's the picture of all that's going on. You see them coming into the house. You see the cat. There's grandfather at her side. She made an impatient gesture with her left hand and fixed her terrible eyes on me. I turned away from them to Father. What does she want? I asked him. I do not know, said Father. She tries to speak and wears herself out. He bent low over Mother and smoothed her forehead. There is nothing so important for you now, Jerusha, my love, as rest. Oh, so this is interesting. So the mother was also named Jerusha. So I'm guessing Jerusha is named after her grandmother. When the Lord means you to tell us what you have in your heart, be assured, he will find the way for you. Now let us pray quietly together. She understands. He turned to me, everything I say to her. His voice and the words of his prayer were gentle and comforting. I glanced again into Mother's eyes, hoping to see some sign of relief. The terror in them was unabated, and they seemed to bore into me, begging for help. Perhaps she can write what she wants to tell us with her left hand. As I said this, I thought I saw a flicker of hope in Mother's eyes. I fetched a pencil and a pad of paper. Father and I raised her shoulders a little, put the pencil in her left hand, and held the pad for her. With her hand shaking crazily, she scrawled a few words on the pad before she dropped the pencil. Braun came in. As he bent over her, she looked up at him, and I saw him wince, then brace himself. He bent lower and kissed her, and managed to look straight into her eyes and smile, while he told her how much he loved her and how he was going to see to it that she got well. He and I, he said, had come expressly to take care of Father, while Mother spent a few days in the hospital. She must leave everything to us. We could handle Father, the house, the parish, anything. She must concentrate all her strength on getting well, and she would. Braun was sure of it. And to show how efficient he was, he told her that he had just fed Sunbeam, and here was the old fellow himself come to pay his respects and assure her that he, Sunbeam, had confidence in Braun. Sunbeam had come in with Braun and sat on the floor beside the bed to consider whether to jump up or not. At this moment he made up his mind, jumped onto the foot of Mother's bed, and started on his post-prandial wash-up. I guess post-prandial must mean eating. We'll have to look that word up and find out what it means. And by the way, I have not been paying at all attention to what's going on here. Make sure you guys haven't had any comments. Nope, I think we're good. Okay. I hoped that Braun's pleasant chatter would reassure Mother, and that the visit from Sunbeam would amuse her. I waited for the terror to leave her eyes, but it stayed on. I hastened to explain to Braun that Mother was trying to write a message to us, and I showed him the pad with her scrawl. He agreed with Father and me that the first word was... Dun, 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 dun. The first word was quilt. Further along, we thought we could make out a C and an SH, but the other letters were so misshapen that not one of us can make out anything. Let's get her the quilt now and have her try again on the other words when she has rested, whispered Braun. Which quilt do you think she wants? The clamshell quilt in the guest room closet, I cried. I felt sure I was right. C and SH certainly fitted, and I knew that Mother set great store by her clamshell quilt. The pattern, to be effective, demands great precision in measuring, cutting, and piecing. Mother's quilt was an especially handsome specimen in blue and white and had won several prizes. How like her, I thought, to want it now to perk her up when she was laid so low, and to impress the strangers who had come into her room here and at the hospital. As I unwrapped the quilt and carried it to Mother's room, I smiled fondly to think how proud my mother was in her modest way, and how, for all she didn't judge others, she knew her own worth and took satisfaction in it. I spread the quilt over her and Sunbeam too, and expected to see the terror in her eyes give way to relief. She plucked at the quilt with her good hand as if to throw it off the bed. She made more unintelligible sounds. More desperately than ever, her eyes implored us to understand and help. Finally, she raised her good hand and shook it impatiently in the general direction of the door. During the next 10 minutes, while Braun and Father anxiously watched, I brought in every quilt in the house and spread each one for Mother to see. She wanted none of them. I made a quick search of the loft over the kitchen L, although I had myself, during my Christmas holiday, gone through everything there. I had thrown out the junk and repacked the trunks and boxes, labeling them old sermons, sewing scraps, photographs, clothes, and so on. There had been no quilts there, and there weren't any now. "Isn't there another storeroom under the mansard?" whispered Braun. I shook my head. "What about the trap door in the hall ceiling with the pull-up ladder that she never lets us pull down? Doesn't it go to the cupola? Cupola begins with C." Again, I shook my head. The windows are broken in the cupola, and it leaks, and the pigeons have taken over. There's nothing there but pigeon nests. I've looked. She couldn't store anything she valued up there. Oh, Braun, I don't know what to do. "Let's let her try the writing again," said Braun. "I know it tires her." He turned to Father. "But she wants to tell us something important. She won't be able to rest until she has." We found the pencil under the bed. Braun helped Father to raise Mother while I put the pencil in her hand and held the pad for her. Her hand was more unsteady than ever, and what she wrote was quite impossible to read. We thought we could make out UP and a P and an I, no more. Braun turned to Mother. "We can't read this very well," he said. "We will guess at each word, and when we guess right, you will tap once with your hand. Do you understand?" Mother tapped once again. Again, I saw a ray of hope in her eyes. I smiled at her. "We'll figure it out," I said. You always said that Braun and I were serious and clever, and you were right." "Up," said Braun. Mother tapped. "In," said Braun. Mother tapped again. "Closet," I tried. No tap. "Shed," I tried again. No tap. "Pipe," interrupted Braun. No tap. "What is going on here?" Dick strode in. "Leave us alone," said Braun. "We're trying to find out something." At this moment, Sunbeam, who was still under the latest quilt we had spread over Mother, came out for air, sprang from the foot of Mother's bed onto Mother's pillow, settled himself, and resumed his washing. "Good God," said Dick. "Are you insane that you let dirty animals wash themselves on the pillow of a patient whose life depends on her not picking up an infection? What sort of nursing care is that?" He swept Sunbeam off the pillow. "Edith, I had expected better of you at least." "You don't understand," said Braun. Dick's face flushed. "That's enough from you," he shouted. "I'm sorry. Edith and Mr. Fonts," he added after a moment. "But unless this zebra leaves the room at once, along with the cat, I'm giving up this case." I saw Braun clench his fist. Oh, by the way, Dick sounds like a jerk. I saw Braun clench his fist. I put my arm around him from behind, and with all my strength, shoved him out ahead of me out the door. Sunbeam had left already. Dick shut the door behind us. A moment later, I heard the ambulance turn into our driveway. Father and I went with Mother and saw her settled in her room at the hospital. Dick asked us not to sit up with her, but to go home and sleep. He put her under sedation and assured us that she would rest quietly through the night. A special duty nurse sat with her, and he himself slept at the hospital to be on instant call. I don't see how he could have done more. However, when the nurse was out of the room for a moment, Mother, who had seemed to be asleep, jerked herself sideways, got her good hand on a pencil lying on the bedside table, and then toppled half out of bed and hit her head against the table leg. The nurse came back, got her in bed, and called Dick, but Mother had had another stroke. This one was fatal. And that is the end of that chapter. So They never got to find out what she was asking for. Obviously, she was asking for the Crazy Quilt, I'm guessing, but still so mysterious. Now, the next chapter, which we will get to on Monday, is Jerusha's narrative. And it says My First Morning. So I'm guessing this is in 1926 when Jerusha and Freddie have come for a visit after grandmother died. Their grandmother died. So we will get to that very soon. That said, it's a little early, but I'm going to go ahead and end here. Get started on my holiday early. I hope for my my U.S. friends, I hope you have a wonderful July 4th weekend. Be safe. If you have friends, neighbors, relatives, especially the youngsters, don't let them play irresponsibly with fireworks. Bad things happen. I belong to a pathology group just because I'm really interested in stuff like that. And the woman that runs this she's a pathologist assistant, and some of the pictures are pretty heinous that she shows. They are not for the lighthearted. But this time of year, she often shows the pictures of firework accidents, and they're horrific. You think that, my cutting my little finger there on a can of corn, I thought that was heinous. You can't even imagine what firework accident looks like. It is bad, and people die from that. So I don't mean to be gruesome or anything, but be safe. Don't teach kids the right thing to do with fireworks, which is not to play with them. And speaking of that fireworks warehouse explosion, holy Moses, I don't know if you guys saw that on TV. It was, I guess, happened yesterday in California. I think 8 or 9 people died from it. So fireworks are so fun to look at. They're so pretty, but they scare me to death. Anything that's explosive. So, yeah, have a safe July 4th. And I guess the other thing about July 4th is, the picnics, the barbecues, people drink too much, and drunk driving we have to be careful about too. So, encourage everyone to stay safe. And in my case, my husband has to work. So he'll be at work doing the holiday stuff with people in the park. And I will be here in the air conditioning, probably sewing. So I hope that if you don't have barbecues or picnics or things to go to, I hope you too will be sitting in the air conditioning and sewing or having a relaxing holiday. So, and if anybody out there is a critical employee who has to work on the 4th of July, know that we appreciate you. I certainly do. Anybody who, has to not enjoy a holiday in order to work their service job, I appreciate you. So, all right, guys, have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Mwah, 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 mwah. Bye, guys.